All right, well, I'm really happy to be here with all of you, and I'm so excited to walk the grounds here. What a beautiful day. So, Becca Rudebusch out at Seeds Farm, and we have been growing vegetables there since 2010. We have 50 acres there, but we grow on about 15 acres in the field, and then we have 5 high tunnels as well that roughly equal about a little less than half of an acre. We grow exclusively for wholesale accounts, so some of our big field crops, onions for a soup company. We grow an acre of habaneros for a hot sauce company. We grow butternut squash and leeks and lunchbox peppers and romaine head lettuce in the field, and those are mostly for food hubs or distributors that we work with. In our high tunnels, we are growing, our main season crops are mostly tomatoes, grape tomatoes for a restaurant chain, heirloom tomatoes and slicer tomatoes for grocery stores. And then we're growing mini cucumbers also for a distributor in our high tunnels. And then we are triple cropping some of our high tunnels with fall and spring greens, mostly for food hubs. So this aerial photo is taken from 2018, where we were a couple years into our high tunnel production. Our high tunnels look very different now. We no longer, those 4 smaller skinny and long structures, those are caterpillar tunnels. Those were 30 feet by 150, no, I'm sorry, those were 15 feet by 100 feet. And now we exclusively are growing in 30 by 150 foot high tunnels. So on our farm, it's my husband and I and our 1-year-old son, Jack. And then we also have a crew of 5 H2A workers coming in from Mexico. They just left for home on Saturday, just in time for this cold snap that we got, which I think they're pretty excited about. And so, yeah, you can see my husband and I and son standing just a week ago in our tunnel that had been in mini cucumbers and now is in romaine head lettuce. And then on the right, you can see a picture of our high tunnel. We have drop-down curtains. So this is a picture of our high tunnel community. So we have 4 of the 30 by 150 Zimmerman high tunnels, and then we also have a Polytex 30 by 72 high tunnel. And if I were to be honest, I think I'm going to one day phase out that Polytex and in its place upgrade it to another Zimmerman, because I just really enjoy having everything exchangeable between the high tunnels. So having a tunnel of a different size, I would prefer that they were all the same. So my rotations worked well and all of my math worked cleanly. Also, the Polytex high tunnel has a much shorter sidewalls, and let's see, the sidewall probably comes up to about here. What is that, like maybe 4 feet? My Zimmerman high tunnels have sidewalls of 8 feet, and so the growing space has very different characteristics inside. And so again, just to keep my management consistent among the high tunnels, that would be another reason why I would like to swap that out for a Zimmerman. So I'm going to be talking twice today. This morning I'm going to be covering growing in high tunnels. So we'll kind of briefly go over bed prep, irrigation, weed control, planting, and cover cropping. Then we're going to spend some more time on cool season crops that I plant in the spring and fall, but spend more of our time on the main season crops. And on our farm, it's tomatoes and cucumbers. And then within those main season crops, we do a ton of pruning and trellising and variety selection, pollination. So we'll talk more on efficiencies, not maybe efficiencies, but way to maximize our yields in those main season crops. And high tunnels are a great opportunity for high gross sales, but it's also a huge labor suck. So we're going to look at the relationship with labor and profit in our tunnels, and then dive into fertigation and fertility management. This afternoon, I'm going to be talking more about high tunnel infrastructure. So if you have any questions related to automation, construction, trellising, irrigation infrastructure, humidity control? Maybe save those questions and we'll have an opportunity to talk about it this afternoon. But I do want to have a disclaimer out there that I am not an expert and that there's many individuals, I'm sure, in this room that know way more than me. I am here today to share with you what we do on our farm and what we've learned, not from a classroom setting. No one ever taught me how to grow a proper tomato or anything. What I've learned over, in our 16 years of growing on the farm is a result of making a mistake or observing something that's not going well and trying to figure out how can I do it better. So if I do share information that anyone wants to correct me on, please feel free. So I know I'm speaking to the choir here because we're all here because we are either growing in a high tunnel or interested in growing in a high tunnel. Maybe we've been growing in it for longer than I've been growing in a high tunnel. So this slide, why are we growing in a high tunnel? You all know this stuff. We can extend the growing season greatly. We can plant earlier. We can grow things longer. I was sitting next to a gentleman who's growing all year round in his high tunnel. We don't do that on our farm. My main interest in growing in a high tunnel is higher yield and higher quality produce. And that is what I've really seen on our farm. I'm also using the structure of the high tunnel to trellis vertically and use all the space in the high tunnel. In the high tunnel, we can play God. We can control when it rains through our irrigation. We can control the temperature and humidity better. I can't ever control it perfectly in there. Maybe with better investment in infrastructure, that's more possible. But I also have a crew of 5 people. If it's rainy and muddy outside, but I'm still paying payroll, we can still get really great work done in our high tunnel and utilize those rainy days efficiently to maximize our crew that we have. And I consider it our insurance plan. Since 2010, I've had straight line winds, I've had a tornado, I've had 2 500-year floods, I've had 2 episodes of golf ball size hail, But inside the high tunnel, it's protected. And if I lose all my peppers to a hailstorm, I still can sell something in my high tunnel.
Can you tell us what's being grown in there?
Sure, yeah. We have Salanova, bok choy, cilantro, spinach, I believe. And I have more photos coming up. So there is definitely a high sales potential in the high tunnels. So I was just looking at my 4 Zimmerman high tunnels, and all in all, we had $103,000 of gross sales this year in our high tunnels. And in addition, we had cool season crops in 3 of our high tunnels, so add another $37,000 some dollars, and it's $141,000 gross sales. Later in the presentation, we're going to break it down what that looks like for profit. I just wanted to grab your attention. You can grow a ton of produce in these high tunnels, and I know I'm not even maximizing everything. I'm sure these numbers could be higher. Yeah. So obviously, everything starts with the bed prep, and we always start with a soil test. It's really important to us, and should be to a farmer, to be making decisions based on real data and not on gut or data is really the best way to make an informed decision. So depending on our soil test, we're going to add nutrients. We'll talk a little bit more about what we add later in the presentation. We don't have any tractors go in our high tunnels, so we didn't want that compaction in there. So we're broad forking every bed, which is a ton of work, I shall say. And then we do use a walk-behind BCS. So we are using our BCS sometimes to make raised beds with a rotary plow. And then we're using the tiller to work in our amendments, make a good flat bed for our plants. In the high tunnel, it's never raining, right? So we're never getting all of the rain flushing the salts through the soil profile. So often we will run our overhead irrigation for 8 hours just to flush the salts down. We do that about once a year or once every other year at the end of the season. So that would be a part of our bed prep. Raised beds we do especially in one tunnel because it's a little lower lying and we have a high water table. And so we found raised beds really keeps the roots of our crops happier. So they're not sitting in saturated water at times of the year. And then oftentimes we will tarp if we have the time. So we will be tarping for weed control. It's a good way for us to flush out seeds that are in the soil. The seeds that are near the surface of the soil are going to germinate, and if they're tarped, then without the sunlight, they're going to grow leggy and then eventually die. We also use it for terminating cover crops. We'll get to that in a second. I'm just going to flip forward a slide so you can see what that tunnel looks like once we take that tarp off. So this is the first year we're growing in a brand new tunnel, and the weed seed bank was tremendous. Isn't that an incredible amount of weeds? We put the tarp back on once we noticed that they weren't dead yet. And it was if you don't disturb the soil, there's the weed seeds that have the potential to germinate at that time of year are not going to germinate during your growing season. Now, caveat, there are different weed seeds germinate at different times of the year. So this isn't killing the weeds that are germinating in July, because this photo was taken in March. You had a question? Yeah, the question is about, would you till before you tarp, or would you just tarp a weedy area? And we always prepare our beds as if we were ready to plant, because once we take off that tarp, we're going to be planting directly into it, because again, we don't want to be disturbing the soil and bringing new weed seeds to the surface. Yeah, question back there. Yeah, the question is about the tarping takes time, and do we have time to tarp and do 3 seasons tarping in between and such? And no. So we didn't grow cool season crops in all of our tunnels. We didn't triple crop in all of our tunnels because we are kind of taking a break. We're also utilizing cover crops as well, and so it's not. We don't have a perfect crop rotation on our farm because it's dynamic. It is always evolving based on what we're growing for our customers. And tarping does take time because it really depends on the temperature. So in order for things to break down and die, you need microorganisms, and those are more active when it is hotter. So in the spring, sometimes we have to, if we're terminating a cover crop, it'll take 6 weeks to adequately kill something. In the summer, when it's really hot, it might only take 2 weeks. So yeah, budgeting time if you're going to be using the tarp is very important. So sometimes we also utilize landscape fabric, investing the payroll dollars at the beginning of the season just to lay down a good landscape fabric and then plant into that versus paying your crew to be cultivating throughout the growing season, I've found to be worthwhile. In our tunnels, we are utilizing drip irrigation for some crops and overhead irrigation for other crops. And it's mostly overhead in the spring and fall, drip in the main season. Drip especially in the main season because we're not getting the leaves wet. I am so obsessed with the leaves of our plants being wet in terms of like humidity and condensation and dew as well as irrigation. So moisture to me means disease. We have learned over the years that we've been severely under irrigating, basically because we started just with 1 row of drip tape per bed of crop in our main season. Then we went to 2, and now next year I'm going to do 4 rows of drip. If you don't have moist soil, the roots of the plant aren't going to grow into it. And so when we just had 1 line of drip irrigation, just think of where all of our roots of our plant were. It was not a large space that they were mining the soil for nutrients. The larger wet area you have for the plant, the more opportunity your plant has to grow a great root network and pull nutrients from even a greater area of your high tunnel, which you've probably spent a lot of time thinking about fertilizing and put down a lot of expensive nutrients. If that's why we really like the overhead irrigation for densely planted crops, basically all of our spring and fall crops, because they are planted so closely together. I don't want to manage all that drip tape. So when we're planting in the high tunnel, it's all by hand. Our main season crops are all planted by taking a small shovel, digging a hole, and planting it. Our cool season crops, often we will use a paper pot transplanter. Is anyone not familiar with the paper pot? Because I can take a second to explain it. All right, cool. We'll move on then. We don't use it in the field because our field is rockier, has less, I don't know, desirable soil for a paper pot transplanter. But in the high tunnel, we've really built up our organic matter, and it's a really nice medium that the paper pot transplanter works really well. I bought ours from Neversink. I also bought this thing on the right from Neversink Farm, and it's really handy for marking out spacing. I have it in the 3-row, 4-row, and 5-row configuration, and it just saves a lot of time from pulling out a 200-foot long measuring tape. We do that for our main season crops though. Not every tunnel gets a cover crop every year, but I like to rotate cover crops through. And when a cover crop is photosynthesizing, it's feeding the biology in your soil. And so it really helps keep your microbes happy. Of course, it's helping with organic matter, it's busting up compaction. But it can be really tricky to fit into your rotation because it can be really hard to kill. And especially because we don't bring our big tractors into our high tunnels. Our tools in our toolbox are limited. Tarping is actually the most effective way that we have found to kill the cover crop. We use oats and peas, winter wheat, and buckwheat that we've used in the past. We would use oats and if we were taking a tunnel out of commission, which we will next year because we've had a tunnel that's been in production for 8 years, and I think it's just time for a break. And so we're going to put oats and peas in the spring, tarp that, then we're going to put buckwheat, tarp that, and then we might do 2 flushes of buckwheat, and then we're going to put winter wheat in it. And that's just going to be a whole season off of production, just caring for the soil. But more often, as a crop comes out of production, we'll put winter wheat in and irrigate it. It'll be growing through the winter, existing through the winter, and then be really vibrant in the spring, and then we'll tarp it to plant our next crop. Don't forget to irrigate it. So I realize that I'm going a lot slower just looking at the time. So I'm going to kind of breeze through some of the next slides just so I can get to some more of the meat that I want to share with you. So these are the cool season crops that we're growing. So tulips, those are just for fun. We tried it as an enterprise once, not doing it again. We have peppers growing in the middle of the bed here. Once we harvest out the lettuce, then our peppers are there. Bok choy and cilantro. Spinach has been really great, especially in the winter. November 10th in 2021, it was 15 degrees outside. Inside, that's what it looked like, and that's what I was having for dinner that night. So that was pretty special to be eating such fresh stuff. Varieties that we like, that we've trialed a lot of different ones. Afterwards, if you want to see any of this information again, I can show you later, just because now I see we're a little tight on time. We grow in our pathways often when we don't need to be walking in them. Managing humidity. We actually got a grant an extreme weather grant from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So now all of our tunnels have heaters, and I didn't write the grant talking about season extension. I wrote the grant talking exclusively about humidity control because hot air holds more moisture, and so you can draw out humidity from your high tunnels utilizing your heaters. You can grow a lot of different things. Later today, we're going to be even learning about growing peaches in high tunnels, which is very exciting. And I know a lot of you grow probably some really unique crops in there as well, but we have ginger, raspberries, strawberries. So moving on to main season crops. So this is, I think next year we trialed growing in more densely. Everything used to be 6 rows per bed, but now I'm going 8 rows per bed because I found we can do it just fine. So all of our tomatoes are 1 row per bed. 1 foot in row spacing. Our tunnels are 30 feet wide, so you can do the math for 8 beds. We have tried so many times growing peppers. They just grow too vegetatively. We haven't quite dialed in our vegetative versus reproductive growth. This is habaneros in a high tunnel versus in the field. Beautiful plants in the high tunnel, low yields per bed foot. Not as beautiful plants in the field, so many more fruit. So mini cucumbers have been growing for 2 years, and I'm really liking growing them. Manor and Splash from Paramount Seeds are the varieties that we grow. We plant them in the greenhouse, and we try to grow them as big as possible in the greenhouse because even though we have heat to heat the air in the high tunnel, the soil temperature is really what I'm looking at for when we're transplanting it out in the high tunnel. Cucumbers, even more than tomatoes, don't like to be cold. So even 430, I transplanted them out. I don't know, I might plant them out a little bit later, just paying more attention to the soil temperature.
What is that? What temperature? Yeah.
Oh, 60 is what I'm thinking. If anyone has a better number, I'd love to hear it. So we are trellising them very intensely. We're doing single leader vertically, and we do it the umbrella style. So we are using this. So in the left, you can see the plastic clip. That's what we used to do. And this year, we actually bought a Tom system clipper. And I really like it because we can use a twine line, and which can go directly in the compost. And the clips are compostable as well. So it makes cleanup more of a breeze, and it's a lot faster to be clipping a whole tunnel. So we are clipping the single leader to a trellis line about every other week, sometimes every week, depending on how fast they're growing, until they reach our overhead line. At that time, we clip it horizontally for 2 weeks, and after that, we just let it go wild. And then they start growing back down, and the suckers start growing, and we just let everything grow after that. We are pruning all of the suckers up until the overhead line, which is about here. It's about 6 feet. And then we're pruning all the fruit to Becca's belly button. So all the flowers. So the plant can spend all of its energy growing the plant, growing the root systems to support a long harvest. So this is what they looked like May 28th, a month after transplant. You can see the lower leaves have the surround on that, and we put the surround on because in the high tunnel, the black soil can get really hot, and cucurbits really hate to be transplanted in the first place. And so that just helps with the shock going through the transplant. We have problems with aphids, spider mites, and cucumber beetles. So for the spider mites, we use these sachets. At this point is when we put on those sachets, and it's predatory spider mites that eat the bad spider mites. And for cucumber beetles, we are using insect netting on our side walls, so cucumber beetles can't come in.
What were you using for spider mites?
It is this product, these sachets. They're called SpyCal, and honestly, I don't know too much about them other than I make a phone call, ask them what I need, and they send it to me.
Splash shades?
SpyCal. Oh, sachets. Yeah. Yep, that you hang on the plant.
Hanging on.
Yep, you hang it on the plant.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of like a tea bag, exactly. And it has the spider mites in it that emerge onto the plant because the predatory spider mites need something to eat. They eat the bad spider mites.
Oh, okay. So the ones you're putting out there are good spider mites.
Yes.
Different ones.
There's lots of different ones, yeah.
Bugs, all kinds of good ones.
Yeah, yep. So the terrible thing about these is you have to harvest them every day, including the weekends. We put them in these cute 1-pound bags, sell them 12 bags per case. They cost money to fill, they cost money to buy, but it is an opportunity for branding. And my grandma would always say, "Oh, for cute." So I decided they would be called "Oh, for Cuke." We've also used Hortonova. I don't like it as much, but it's a lot less labor. So maybe I do like it. We did that when we did our slicer cucumbers. Corinto was the variety that I liked the most. So moving on to tomatoes, Sweetel, Big Dina, Geronimo, Marnero, and B Orange are the varieties that we like. We try to, again, grow them big in our greenhouse where we're already paying for propane. And we like to get them as big as possible, but we have to spread out our flats because otherwise they'll grow this tall. But if we spread them out, they'll grow this tall and be a lot sturdier. So when we transplant them out, they don't flop over right away.
Are
Yeah.
you grafting tomatoes?
We have, and then we didn't, and we're going to go back to grafting some varieties. And honestly, when I think about grafting, the expense of grafting, it's not as expensive as I think when I realize with grafting, I can get more pounds of fruit per plant. Well, if it honestly pays for itself in the increased yields and then some. So I'm not as afraid of spending the money on the grafting as much.
And which varieties like that were you grafted?
I think Big Dina and Sweet Tel I'll graft next year. Yeah. So making sure you are finding high tunnel specific varieties that are disease resistant to what you find in your area. They're more expensive, but I will say they're definitely worth it. If you can get just 1 week more harvest, 2 week, 3 week, it's paying for itself over and over and over again. So here's what our tomatoes look like, planting them and the dates. May 27th, that's what they look like. Once they set their first flowers, we are bringing in bumblebees. So we have someone who keeps honeybees on the farm. There's tons of bees on the farm, but bumblebees pollinate the tomato flowers more aggressively. When you actually look at a flower, if it's been pollinated by a bumblebee, it'll actually be bruised. And I want every flower to produce a beautiful, heavy fruit that I can sell. So it's worthwhile to me spending money on bumblebee hives. So first blush, June 25th, and now we are harvesting in July. I'm actually going to, if it's possible, to save questions for the end, just because we are so tight on time. Or I'm also happy to talk after the fact, too. So this year, we had so much fruit on our first 2 trusses that our plant aborted flowers later on. And then, so we harvested early in the season, had so many tomato sales, and then our customers were very happy. They wanted the same amount every week. All of a sudden, now that we're harvesting at the level where there's no flowers, now we have no tomatoes to sell them. We actually lost a really big customer over that this year. So next year, we're going to be pruning our fruit clusters to 3 to 4 fruit per cluster. We also are pruning for better airflow, moisture, disease. So as we are harvesting the leaves as well. We're not doing it at the same time. It's a separate activity that we send our crew through just to prune the bottom leaves. We're also lower in leaning because we used to not, and I'd have to send our crew up with ladders, which is really expensive to go up a ladder, down a ladder, move the ladder, go up a ladder, down a ladder, move the ladder. And time is money when you have employees. And it's also a lot safer not to have to use a ladder. That's actually the primary reason someone fell off a ladder, and they were fine, but an eye-opening experience. So if we are lowering and leaning, we have these vine supports that the tomato lies on that keeps them from touching the dirty soil. Our tomato plants this year were 35 feet diagonally. And so it always keeps everything at a height that you can be harvesting. It also keeps the tomato plants out of the peak of the tunnel where it's hottest. And when it's very hot, the tomato plant will abort the flowers. And of course, now you don't have fruit once you get up to that harvest. So, like I said, high gross sales potential, but also high labor. So in our slicer tomato tunnel, we lower and leaned those plants 5 times. We pruned them 10 times, clipped them 8. We planted them once. We connected them to the lines initially once. We cleaned them up once. We pruned the lower leaves 3 times, and we harvested it for 15 weeks. I think we could totally stretch it longer with better management, which is the goal for future years. So this is the time it takes one person to do 1 bed. So 47.5 hours each bed. So let's revisit our gross sales, and now let's plug in the labor, and all of a sudden our profit is a lot less. And that doesn't include any of the materials in this calculation here. So that's a lot of money to spend on managing tunnels, and it's also the opportunity cost because for those hours, our crew isn't working in our 15 acres of the field. That also needs our time and attention. So if you it's kind of, I think of it as an all or nothing. If you're not going to do a good job keeping up with it, then I wouldn't ask much of the tunnel in terms of high yields. I would be happy, or, what you put into it is what you get. So high density and high yield means high nutrient demand. So I can grow in a high tunnel as many tomatoes as I used to grow out in the field. And so I need to plan my nutrients for heavier yields. So what we do is we broadcast 30 pounds per bed of a Sustain 464 pelleted fertilizer, and then I am fertigating about 5 pounds per acre a week of EnviroCure, which is a liquefied chicken manure. It's a 303 starting 4 weeks after transplant. And then at fruiting, that's really when the potassium demand increases for tomatoes. It's about double what it is of nitrogen. So then I'm adding sulfate of potash into that EnviroCure. So it's getting double the amount of potassium as nitrogen. So this is just a slide demonstrating, if you're asking if the nitrogen need based on your yield goal. So if you're hoping for a good yield, that 110 pounds an acre is actually 300 pounds an acre equivalent that you need to be thinking of supplying nitrogen. And we were growing, our slicer tomatoes were 3.6 pounds per square foot, so that puts us in between the good and high. So that's about 350 pounds of nitrogen per acre that we're hoping to supply. I'm going to skip over the fertigation math, but I'd be happy to talk about it with any of you later today. But I'm walking through how we calculate, because I think it's really hard to internalize, like, this is the goal, but logistically, how do I get there? So this is the math and the way that I went through figuring out that I needed to set my dosatron at a ratio of 1 to 300 for 25 minutes. And that's how I supplied the 5 pounds an acre. And then talking about the potassium needs increasing, we use this sulfate of potash, which dissolves really easily in our EnviroCure as long as we have like a pond aeration pump going in there. And so I want to make, once they start to fruit, I want to make my EnviroCure liquid, which is already a 303, I want to make it a 306. So this is the math that I did to get to that point. I basically pour in the potassium into my tank of EnviroCure and I mix it. So this is the irrigation infrastructure. We'll talk more about it later this afternoon, but I have 2 dosatrons. The first one is going into the tank of citric acid solution. We'll talk about that again this afternoon. The second dosatron is set at 300 to 1 going into that bulk tank that at the beginning of the season is just EnviroCure, and then at fruiting, I dump in the potassium and mix it up. So that is how we are fertigating our high tunnels. These, depending on your soil test and what you need, these are common organic soil amendments, which yep, that's, yes. And then just budgeting time for cleanup. It takes a lot more time than you think. So with that, I think we have time for 5 minutes of questions. Yeah.
Real quick, the B boxes, we have 150-foot tunnels too. You put 2 boxes in one of those tunnels, or just one?
We put 1 bee box in each tunnel.
For the whole season?
For the whole season, and you could do more.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had just a question about the bee boxes about safety. What do you kids or the crew?
Oh yes, repeating the question. So safety with the bee boxes. So bumblebees, yes, in their 5 years of doing bee boxes, we've only had 1 person be stung, and we're working in those high tunnels often. I don't know much about bee behavior. They're really interested in doing their job and less interested in us. We always ask our crew, is anyone allergic to bees? We have an EpiPen on the farm as part of our first aid kit. And I guess thankfully we haven't had any issues.
Just to elaborate on that factor, I'm not familiar with bee boxes. So is it like you're just releasing them from the box? Is that the nesting site they go back to? It's gonna be kind of avoid going.
Yeah, so how do the bee boxes work? So I order them online and they get shipped to me overnight, and they come with a sugar source. Well, they come, if you open up the bee box, there's a plastic container that has the bees in them and it's ventilated. Underneath it, there's a sugar source, and because they're shipped overnight, they arrive without any food during their transport. So the first thing you do is you open the cap to the sugar source. And so now the bees have that. You put it in your high tunnel in the shade. And because you have a tunnel full of flowers and full of food, they're really motivated to stay where the food is. And so when it comes in the mail, I just put it in the middle of the high tunnel. I put it in a box on its side, so it's providing shade for it, so it isn't getting direct sunlight. And then I open up the trap door and walk away, and the bees do the rest.
I wanted to add something about the bees. I did some work for, I'm a car mechanic, but I did some work for a customer, Grady's Tomatoes from Carroll, Iowa. I think he's got about 8 greenhouses, and I questioned to the fact about how do you do the pollination, and his response was the bumblebees. And I had asked him, why don't you use honeybees? His claim was the honeybees will try to get out of the greenhouse. The bumblebees, if they get out, they try to get back in.
Oh, interesting. So, yeah, the comment was that honeybees try to get out of the greenhouse, but bumblebees,
If they get out, they try.
if they get in, they try to get back in.
Home is inside.
Yeah, home is inside the hive. Every night they come back to that hive.
Back to the box.
Yeah.
And that's what his claim, because normally you think honeybees would be the ideal thing, but that in that instance, it isn't.
Right.
And, gosh, I did work for him. He's probably had them at least 10 years, maybe 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised at that response.
Mm-hmm.
But there's experience there. I mean, he's obviously tried it.
Yeah. Question back there.
I have a question about if you think you're going to add more tunnels or if you're satisfied, like if you're gonna use up more of your 18-acre.
Yeah, are we interested in building more? So my mentality was once I make enough money on the farm, I'm going to buy another high tunnel. And that had been my goal for many years, and that's how we ended up. Well, we got a grant to buy one of them and an NRCS grant to partially fund 2 of them. Now that we have 5, are we going to add more? I'm going to upgrade one of ours, and we're kind of landlocked unless I I don't know. 5 is a lot to manage also.
You're talking about labor costs.
Yeah.
You feel like you're sitting okay.
At this point, we're sitting okay. Yeah. Not at this point. Question back there.
We talked about fertigation. Do you ever have a need to foliar feed, handle, or spray with any pesticide? Has that been an issue?
We've sprayed, have we had to foliar feed or have experienced foliar feeding or spray anything for pests? The answer is yes. We've sprayed for tomato hornworm and dipel. And in the tomatoes, nothing else. In the cucumbers, we've had problems with aphids. And my husband was the one who managed that. So I can't say off the top of my head what we sprayed, but I know we did spray for the aphids. Foliar feeding, I know we could do more with tissue testing and foliar feeding. That would definitely be an area for improvement that I'd like to get into. Time for one more question. Take it over here.
Are you tissue testing, or how are you determining what you need to fertigate during the season?
Yeah, we are not tissue testing. Would love to get into that. And how did I come up with 5 pounds an acre? That is, I'm not sure where we came up with it. I believe I read it somewhere in an article, some research article, and it has been serving us. And again, I think that would be room for improvement to dial in our nutrition even more through tissue testing. But at this point, we're not doing that. All right, well, thank you very much.